Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We are starting this event. So thank you so much for coming. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the dear excellencies, distinguished guests, friends and colleagues, and also our audience online who's watching us on the UN Web TV. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ksenia Pernavska. I'm Youth for Disarmament alumna and also Open Nuclear Network Engagement and Network Specialist. And I'm very happy to moderate the opening of today's side event, Future-Proofing the NPT, a youth-led intergenerational dialogue on nuclear weapons and emerging technologies. So thank you all for taking time to be here. And before I give a floor to our high-level speakers, I would like to say what is special about this event and why is it worth your time during this break. So first, this session was designed to look slightly ahead, to reflect on how current trends are already shaping or even straining the NPT and what the future of the treaty might look like. Second, we intended this event not to be only the series of opinions from experts, but we really wanted to organize a genuine dialogue between younger experts and more senior practitioners. And in the second part of the event, you will exactly see that. And importantly, we also meant for this conversation not to be isolated, and hence we invited the member states representative to give their reflections of the discussion at the third part of this event. So this is the outline, and at its core, the core of this event is a simple question. How do we ensure that NPT remains effective, inclusive, and reflective of a rapidly evolving world? So to help us begin, we are honored to be joined by two distinguished speakers. We are privileged to welcome Director Adedeji Ibo. He's the Deputy to the United Nations High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. And we're also delighted to welcome Ms. Baek Yeon-jung, Deputy Director General for International Security at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Adedeji Ibo to take the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and especially our dear young people, and some of them not as young as they used to be. I remember Ulysses used to be much younger. He's still young. And I'm particularly happy to see and to welcome my former boss, Tom Makram, who is now retired, but certainly not tired. Tom is now much liberated, and I'm sure you'll be hearing what he can say and I cannot currently say, because he's no longer officially in the hot seat. Tom, you are welcome. I'm very happy to see you, and all the other colleagues that used to be in ODA but have now, even though still young, have grown to higher responsibilities. It is literally a pleasure to welcome you to this youth-led event, which is co-organized with the government of the Republic of Korea. And I would like to particularly thank the Republic of Korea for its valued partnership and continued support for ODA's flagship youth outreach program, which we call Youth for Disarmament. This event is also part of a broader set of youth-led initiatives that we in ODA are convening around the NPT Review Conference, reflecting the importance of opening intergovernmental spaces to young people in ways that make multilateral disarmament discussions more inclusive and forward-looking. Today's discussion builds on the important foundation laid last year through the first ever Youth for Disarmament Forum, which launched a youth-led conversation on nuclear weapons and emerging technologies. Young people brought fresh thinking, strong policy recommendations, and a clear reminder that the future of disarmament cannot be shaped without those who will live longest with its consequences. This side event draws directly on that momentum and the forum's outcome document by carrying the conversation into the NPT context with a particular focus on the future of the treaty. Yet, the future of the NPT is about more than the future of a treaty. It is about whether this cornerstone of the global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation architecture can remain credible, relevant, and resilient in a rapidly changing and challenging world. The NPT remains an essential foundation across disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful uses of nuclear technology. But that foundation is under pressure. Progress on disarmament is widely seen as too slow. Multilateralism as a whole is under strain, and rapid development in technologies, from AI to information and communication technologies, are reshaping the security environment in ways our institutions are still struggling to catch up with. These developments bring both risks and opportunities, but above all, they underscore the need for the NPT to remain responsive to a changing world. But future-proofing the NPT is not only about technology, it is also about people. If the future of the treaty is being discussed without the meaningful involvement of those who will inherit that future, then something important is missing. Too often, young people, especially from the global south and majority constituencies, still have too little influence in formal NPT discussions. Yet, they are not simply observers. They are already leaders, advocates, and contributors, bringing urgency, imagination, and new ideas to the table. That is precisely why this event matters and why it is so timely. It is not a discussion about youth, but a discussion shaped by youth, organized by young people themselves, from idea to execution. It shows what meaningful participation can look like when young people are trusted not only to join the conversation, but also to help lead the conversation. By inviting us to reflect through a future-oriented scenario, this event encourages us not only to respond to present challenges, but also to ask what choices we must make to ensure that NPT remains effective, relevant, and responsive for generations to come. I would like to leave you with the words of the Secretary General, and I quote, "Today, humanity is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. We need the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as much as ever. That is why this review conference is so important. It's an opportunity to hammer out the measures that will help avoid certain disaster and to put humanity on a new path towards a world free of nuclear weapons," unquote. With that in mind, I hope today's discussion will be dynamic, interactive, and ambitious. But above all, I hope it serves as a reminder that keeping the NPT strong will depend not only on preserving what already exists, but on having the courage to listen, to adapt, and to make space for new voices and new ideas. Because future-proofing the NPT is not only about protecting a treaty, but also about protecting our shared future. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ibo, for your remarks. Ms. Bake, the floor is yours.
Hello, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear youth participants. It's my great honor and privilege to deliver the opening remarks at this youth-led intergenerational dialogue as a part of this year's NPT Review Conference. I wish to express my sincere appreciation to UNODA for their dedicated efforts in organizing and hosting a society event. Today's dialogue builds on the UN Youth for Disarmament Forum held in 2025 at UN headquarters and is linked to the forum's outcome document. It's therefore particularly meaningful and gratifying to see the young leaders from 14 different countries here in person today. Following last year's Youth for the Y4D Forum, I extend my warmest welcome to all of you. Today, global security environment is more complex and uncertain than ever. Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the ongoing situation in the Middle East, and the proliferation challenges posed by the DPRK and Iran are intensifying instability and undermining the global disarmament and non-proliferation regime. Diverging views between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states on the pace of and approach to nuclear disarmament are further undermining the credibility of NPT. Furthermore, the unprecedented and rapid advancement of emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, drones, and outer space technologies is transforming not only our daily lives, but is also posing new and profound challenges to the global disarmament and non-proliferation regime. Against this backdrop, the role of the young generation when discussing the intertwining of nuclear weapons and newfound technologies is of paramount importance. Building and upholding international norms is not the sole responsibility of diplomats or experts. Voices of all stakeholders. To foster sustainable global peace and security, voices of all stakeholders in the international community, particularly those of youth, who live today and will lead tomorrow, must be heard and respected. With this conviction, the Republic of Korea has been promoting the biennial resolution titled Youth, Disarmament, and Non-Proliferation since 2019. Through this resolution, we have emphasized the importance of youth engagement, empowerment, and education in advancing disarmament and non-proliferation. To implement these commitments, we have organized a variety of programs in close collaboration with UNODA. Most recently, we supported the very first UN Youth for Disarmament Forum held during the 80th General Assembly. The forum made a fresh contribution to the first committee's deliberations on the theme of nuclear weapons and emerging technologies, while building a vibrant and forward-looking network of the next generation of leaders. At the national level, the ROC has been operating the Korean Youth Envoys for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation program each year, involving more than 20 to 30 young participants. We look forward to the expansion of networking opportunities between our Korean Youth Envoys and the Youth for D, Y4D leaders, further fostering intergenerational discourse and strengthening the sustainability of the disarmament and non-proliferation regime. Before closing, I would like to express my heartfelt encouragement to the young participants here today. I understand that Y4D leaders and the young participants here today have devoted themselves studying and exchanging views on nuclear weapons and emerging technologies. I also look forward to a fruitful exchange addressing emerging challenges and opportunities, which I am confident will nourish consultation and future NPT discussions with fresh insights and creative ideas. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peck and Mr. Ebo, for your insightful opening remarks. Before I give the floor to start the intergenerational dialogue, I wanted to quickly set the scene and present a futuristic scenario that we prepared for this side event to give a color to what kind of future we can expect if certain trends continue to develop. So the first, imagine 10 years from now, you're sitting in the same room, most likely came for the 13th NPT review conference, so it's been 10 years, what the world looks like on the outside. Emerging technologies, dual-use technologies, AI, cyberspace technologies, they are reshaping the security faster than governance can adapt. We see that space is no longer distant, it's contested, and we're already talking about NPPs or anti-satellite nuclear weapons. With the AI, we're no longer talking about the potential role of AI in nuclear decision-making. It's already happening, and we see it. We see how progressively corporations, AI corporations, are cooperating with the government, with different governments on military realm. And in 10 years, most likely that will develop. But the policy that governs nuclear policy and the emerging technologies is trying to catch up, but kind of out of breath. At the same time, we also see the huge gap between the technical and policy communities. They're not speaking to each other; they're speaking different languages, and the questions are becoming more technical every day, but we don't have the right people to explain what are the risks and what are the opportunities that are coming with those emerging and dual-use technologies. What we also see in the rooms that we see the lack of multi-stakeholder engagement. We see the diplomats, we see experts organizing the side events like this one. But we miss in industry, we miss in academia, we miss in labs, or maybe big corporations that potentially might not even know that this process is happening in New York once in a while. So they're missing from the negotiation table, and their voices are not heard, and their very important perspectives that practically shape the environment are not heard as well. And then it comes to youth. In 10 years, we still might see the lack of the representation, especially from the global majority countries. We have visa issues, we have funding issues, and it's very hard to enter spaces as such. But in 10 years, it might be exacerbated quite extensively, considering all the trends we're seeing now. And the problem is not even the access itself, but what if in 10 years the youth won't be interested to join the spaces? What if it's not even about the access? What if it's about interest? And all those future decision makers that we are relying on just won't want to be a part of this process anymore and won't want to be a part of change. So what we have is NPT, probably in a perfect shape, still standing, still there. The conferences are happening. The final outcome documents, maybe they are not, but it's isolated in a glass dome. And the risks and the different wars and risks are happening around, but people might not even look at this glass door anymore. And the problem is that the NPT just stopped serving the audiences. It was the people it was created for, and the problems it was created for. And the question is not whether the future will happen. We already see those trends happening. It's about whether we are prepared to do something about it and actually change the course of that potential disconnect and isolation that NPT may appear in 10 years. So with that in mind, I would like to pass the floor to the fellow moderator and Youth for Disarmament alumna, Anna Menio, to start the intergenerational dialogue and discuss all the issues mentioned above.
Thank you, Ksenia. The scenario we've just heard highlights a dual challenge. While emerging technologies shape nuclear risks faster than governance can respond, many, especially younger generations from the global majority, remain underrepresented in shaping these responses. So to respond to these challenges, I'm pleased to introduce 4 speakers who will be participating in the intergenerational dialogue. First, we have Tom Macram, who's a former South African diplomat and retired UN official specializing in disarmament and multilateral diplomacy. He served as director and deputy to the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs from 2016 to 2022 and held senior roles within the UN on weapons of mass destruction. During his UN tenure, he was Secretary General of the 2015 and 2010 review conferences on the NPT, and also for the conference that concluded and adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017. He is now a non-resident distinguished expert at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. Next, we have Dr. Wilfred Wan, who's the Director of Weapons of Mass Destruction Program at the Stockholm Institute, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. His research focuses on nuclear weapon risk reduction, nuclear disarmament verification, and other issues related to arms control and disarmament. He also serves as the co-chair for the Alva Myrdal Center Working Group on Nuclear Disarmament in Policy and International Law. Next, we have Umi Ariga, who's a research fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs, focusing on emerging technologies and U.S.-Japan relations. Previously at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, Umi led research on nuclear norms and divestment in controversial weapons. With experience at J.P. Morgan, UN Office of Disarmament Affairs, and NATO, she is also an alumnus of the Youth for Disarmament Forum, which took place last October, alongside Yorgo Al-Mubayed, who is a program coordinator at the IGEM Foundation, home to the world's largest synthetic biology innovation competition. His work centers on building synthetic biology ecosystems through research, education, and community engagement, with a strong focus on responsible innovation, biosecurity, and science policy linkages. A 2021 IGEM Science Safety and Security Fellow, Yorgo has collaborated with the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs since 2023 across both the Youth for Biosecurity and Youth for Disarmament initiatives, focusing on the Biological Weapons Convention and NPT. His technical background spans AI and biolab automation, biomedicine production, DNA synthesis screening, and structure-guided drug design. So, first of all, I'll invite some brief reflections on this scenario before we move into a more interactive exchange. So, a question for each of our speakers. In the face of these accelerating technological developments and inclusion gaps, what do you see as the most significant risk to the credibility and legitimacy of the NPT? So for this, I ask you to please keep your remarks to 2 minutes. And maybe we can start with Tom.
Thank you very much. For the last few years, I have felt that one of the most significant risks to the NPT was the possibility of a breakaway. This was based on the seemingly growing attraction amongst some states that acquiring nuclear weapons would somehow guarantee their safety. The majority of states joined the NPT in the belief that it would reduce the risk of nuclear war and eventually eliminate the threat of nuclear weapons altogether. The ongoing modernization and in some cases expansion of nuclear arsenals by some of the nuclear weapon states is premised on responding to the deteriorating geopolitical security environment. This justification seems to appeal to aspirant states in perceived hostile regional security environments. Some cases of attacks by nuclear weapon states on non-nuclear weapon states may also lead the same states to conclude that acquiring nuclear weapons would be their only guarantee of safety from attack. In the case of the DPRK and the concerns over the Iranian nuclear program, underline this. Any breakaway from the treaty would lead to a cascade effect of proliferation where regional insecurity would trigger other neighboring states to follow suit as quickly as possible. This would seriously undermine the treaty's credibility and relevance. Advances in technology and the introduction of AI lower the technical and control barriers for proliferation. They also shorten the traditionally regarded timelines for the development of capacities to transition to nuclear weapons. The slow pace of the nuclear non-proliferation regime to plug such proliferation pathways could only exacerbate this problem and speed up any potential cascade. On a secondary note, I personally do not want to future-proof the NPT in all its aspects. Its initial lifespan was 25 years, which was indefinitely extended in 1995. And while we want to check non-proliferation and we want to promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, we do not want to extend the retention of nuclear weapons indefinitely. What we need is the nuclear weapon states to work seriously towards nuclear disarmament, inevitably leading to a treaty that would supersede the disarmament component of the NPT. They would ensure the dismantlement and the disarmament verification of all nuclear weapons of all nuclear possessor states, including those outside the NPT.
Thank you very much. And maybe we can just move down to Umi next.
Thank you. So I think that one of the main risks is actually structural. So the NPT's 5-year review cycle was designed for a world where the primary risks were changing slowly and visibly. But the technologies that are shaping nuclear risk today are evolving over months, if not weeks. And the governance conversations that are most relevant to nuclear stability are happening across different forums, including REAIM, the CCW, and the IAEA. And to a great extent, these are the forums that are the most appropriate to address the technicalities of emerging technologies. That being said, the NPT needs to recognize and address the ways in which emerging technologies exacerbate existing nuclear issues, notably nuclear conventional integration. For example, in the way AI-enabled systems compress decision timelines, leaving less time to distinguish from a conventional threats from a nuclear one, or how counter-space capabilities worsen ambiguity because the satellites that they target are often serve both conventional and nuclear command and control systems. And that cuts against the very spirit of the NPT, whose ultimate goal is disarmament, but whose conditions for progress are being eroded by developments happening entirely outside of its purview. So the Useful Disarmament Forum outcome document, which you'll find on your tables, speaks to this directly. It calls for a standing mechanism to assess emerging technology risks between review cycles and for nuclear-armed states to disclose where AI is being used in nuclear-related functions. And we think that these are the kinds of baseline steps that would allow the treaty to remain meaningful for a meaningful framework for the security environment that we actually live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Umi. Maybe we can move to Wilfred now.
First, thanks for the invitation and to be a part of this conversation. I think it's important not to think about like the NPT as this like nebulous abstract thing that exists in a vacuum, but rather as comprising the member states that are party to the treaty. So when we talk about credibility and legitimacy, it requires states parties remain committed to the treaty, to its foundational purpose, its principles, and to their obligations, right, to ensure that the cornerstone of global nuclear order remains as such. You guys did a really wonderful job with the futuristic scenario and the outcome document. The thing I would emphasize is that thinking about nuclear weapons is changing in response to the security environment. And this links to what Tom was saying as well, where an increasing number of states are considering the utility of these capabilities to ensure their national security. In terms of reopen conversations about extended nuclear deterrence, nuclear sharing, even potentially indigenous nuclear programs. And there's perhaps less nuance in some of these dialogues about the risks that accompany increased reliance on nuclear weapons, about issues of unpredictability and instability with respect to nuclear deterrence in light of technological developments, about the costs of nuclear arms racing, including from an economic perspective, but also from sociocultural or institutional aspects. And because of this, which is intimately linked to all of these factors that you guys have highlighted in these documents, about technological advancements, about inclusion gaps, consequently what all of that means for the credibility of the regime. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, and we can move to Yorgo.
Thank you. So I'd like to build up on what was said so far and ground these points into what has materially changed since 2022 or the review conference, and why the cost of that gap is now much higher. So since 2022 and way before, many technologies and emerging technologies, among them AI, have moved from research into active applications. So we're witnessing firsthand how autonomous systems have been tested and deployed in live conflict environments. The integration of AI into early warning, targeting, and command and control functions is no longer hypothetical. It's happening at varying speeds with major gaps across nuclear-armed and nuclear-capable states alike. And the NPT has no formal visibility into any of this. So practically, this creates two compounding risks. The first one is the one we discussed most, and I invite you once again to look at the outcome document, which are the compressed decision timelines, increased probability of miscalculation, escalation dynamics that outpace human judgment. The second is equally consequential and less examined, the accountability gap. So when an autonomous system contributes to an escalatory incident, existing frameworks, whether legal, political, or institutional, are ill-equipped to assign responsibility clearly. And that ambiguity is itself destabilizing. It erodes the confidence-building logic that underpins the NPT's disarmament pillar. So our generation will inherit these problems, among many others. We will inherit them without having shaped the governance response, and in many cases without even being part of the rooms where these discussions are being deferred. So a standing intercessional mechanism is the architecture needed for the NPT to have any real-time visibility into these developments. And nuclear-armed states reporting on AI use in nuclear functions through national reports should not be regarded as an intrusion, but a baseline of transparency that confidence building requires. So in many ways, the technology is not waiting for the next review conference, and neither should we.
Thank you all for your reflections. And now to move to discuss these governance gaps a little bit further. So if you could try to keep your remarks in this section to around 3 minutes, we first have a question for Wilfred. The scenario suggests that governance is struggling to keep pace, and Yorgo just talked about this, struggling to keep pace with dual-use technologies and emerging technologies like AI and increased cyber capabilities. Where do you see the most dangerous gaps emerging, particularly in terms of decision-making, verification, or safeguards?
Thanks, and I think my comments do dovetail nicely from what Yorgo just said. The broader point I would start with is that there isn't really a systematized or structured way in which governance processes examines these developments. And with the NPT, for instance, this would require proper risk assessment across all of its pillars. How might AI or cyber or things like outer space developments and quantum technologies impact thinking around nuclear weapons? How might it impact potential access to nuclear materials and knowledge? What that means for potential proliferation or for peaceful uses, for that matter. And this requires, as you said at the outset, engaging with the actors that are most responsible for these changes, right, including the private sector and industry in particular. And that gets to the point about a more inclusive conversation. Here I would look at examples of other WMD regimes. The Scientific Advisory Board of the TPNW, or in the CWC, the Chemical Weapons Convention. Discussions of the Science and Technology Review Mechanism in the Biological Weapons Convention. These kind of approaches can and should be considered by NPT stakeholders. In terms of the most concerning gaps, I'm a little biased because a lot of my work at CIPRI is about escalation risk. So in particular, ways in which these developments across domains and technologies are enhancing conventional capabilities and in the process creating new nuclear vulnerabilities by undermining nuclear forces directly, by affecting related capabilities, whether offensive, defensive, affecting enabling systems that facilitate the preservation of these forces, or simply by impacting data that is presented to decision makers, including in a manner that raises the doubts about the reliability or control over their own nuclear forces. And importantly, a broader and more complex effect of strategic technologies is that they're driving changes in nuclear weapons planning in terms of potentially expanding the scope of circumstances in which nuclear use is considered. So there's not just recognition that there are more capabilities with strategic relevance, but the expectation that these other domains are areas of future likely confrontation, which translates into their prioritization, their capability development, and also links to nuclear deterrence principles. So that's what concerns me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And moving to Tom, given your extensive experience on the NPT and its history, I was hoping you could speak a little bit on how this treaty has changed and developed over time. And with this context, what might constrain the efforts to close some of these governance gaps that have been discussed?
Thanks. The NPT is an inherently discriminatory treaty. It's made up of nuclear weapon states, the haves, non-nuclear weapon states, the have-nots, and the latter containing a subset of states covered by a nuclear umbrella. Its advantage is that it is a multilateral treaty with nearly universal adherence, but the disadvantage is that it works like other multilateral fora and instruments with a consensus-making mechanism so that its outcomes reflect the lowest common denominator. This treaty is nearly 60 years old, born out of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the fear of possible proliferation of up to 40 states. It has shown remarkable resilience and longevity. Major successes include South Africa acceding in 1991 after dismantling its nuclear weapons, France and China coming on board in the 90s. Its failures include the breakaway by the DPRK. It has adapted to plug gaps in safeguards, for example, after the Iraq concerns in the 90s with the additional protocol. Yet, review conferences have, despite the compelling need, failed to repeat in making this the gold standard for safeguards. The IAEA has done a remarkable job as the implementing arm of safeguards in adapting and strengthening the guardrails and in promoting peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The NPT has failed to become universal. 3 nuclear possessor states never joined, and despite the concerns about aspirant states, the NPT and the IEA guardrails and the safeguards have to a large degree managed to keep things in check and to maintain compliance. All multilateral treaties, including the NPT, have to be, for want of a better word, tech responsive, as developments are always going to outpace the ability to keep up. NPT states parties are masters of their own fate, and how the treaty adjusts or fails to adjust rests in their own hands. The NPT is a political instrument. It is dominated by power politics, where the N5 happen to be the P5, and non-nuclear weapon states have to work hard to make an impact, especially in trying to bridge the gap between deterrence and disarmament. It is a treaty for states parties, so there has always been an inclusivity gap in formal proceedings, and the NPT has struggled to make headway in closing that, including by the participation of civil society and the youth. That's why I'm glad we're having events like this. Being a good resource for expertise and making a persuasive case can influence states parties, and some NGOs do this very well. The younger generation can follow this route, or they can consider careers in diplomacy themselves and end up at the negotiating tables themselves. All current and previous negotiators were also young at one stage. I agree there is a weak transmission of institutional knowledge and more should be done, and I'm pleased to say that there are champions for this cause, especially targeted at the younger generation, and particularly by the Republic of Korea, by Japan, by UNODA, and also by CNS. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now bridging to our kind of youth participants, the scenario highlights that younger generations, particularly those from the global majority, remain underrepresented in shaping NPT discussions, which was also discussed. So to turn to Umi, what does meaningful inclusion actually require in practice?
So as Tom said, the governance challenges that this treaty faces today are fundamentally political. That being said, political discussions that are disconnected from technical realities cannot produce good outcomes. And right now, the people who best understand the technologies reshaping nuclear risk are largely absent from the rooms where political decisions are being made. So that's a problem for the quality of the discussion, but it's also a problem for the treaty's credibility. So the NPT's legitimacy rests on the idea that it represents a shared commitment to a safer world. But when the global majority and people who will live longest with the nuclear risks are visibly excluded from shaping it, this claim becomes harder to sustain. And a treaty negotiated without them is increasingly difficult to be presented as a treaty for those people. So what would actually help? So again, our group put together some recommendations in our outcome documents, including structured roles for youth and technical experts in the review process, as well as structural multi-year funding for global majority participation built into the review cycle and not dependent on voluntary contributions. And another point is on knowledge transfer that runs in both directions in initiatives like we are doing today. So younger experts that can bring hopefully fresh ideas as well as technical fluency on emerging technologies with senior diplomats bringing institutional memory and negotiating history. I think both are needed today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Umi. And so we have these programs that include youth, we have youth participation, but to move to Yorgo, what moves youth participation from just participation to actual influence?
So in practice, we already have working models, and this should not be an issue that the NPT needs to solve from scratch. So I'd like to quickly reflect on my experience from the Biological Weapons Convention and its intersessional process with the meeting of experts or the meeting of state parties, and how youth or the next generation has contributed to that process. So over the past several years, the next generation researchers, many from the global majority, have moved from attending side events to contributing technical language that found its way into formal deliberation. Not because a quota was created, but because structured access combined with technical credibility created the conditions for influence. And the mechanism can be replicable. Early and sustained engagement, not last-minute inclusion. The issue is quickly becoming how can we measure the causal impact of these contributions while acknowledging that this remains a challenge. So attribution in multilateral processes is rarely clean, and we should be honest about that. But the mechanism itself is legible. So technical credibility, structured access, and institutional continuity over time, those three conditions combined together produce influence. And when one is missing, you could get just participation. So like it was said before, the NPT doesn't live in void, but it has the opportunity to adopt that model rather than invent a new one, because the architecture exists, and what is needed is a decision to apply it here consistently and with the same seriousness we bring to verification and safeguards. So yeah, I think I can close it here.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. And we've heard about governance gaps, we've heard about accelerating technology, and we've heard about the issue of lack of representation of critical industries, critical partners, critical stakeholders, and also the fact that youth are sometimes included, sometimes not influencing actual outcomes. One thing that our youth participants brought up was the Y4D outcome document, which you all see, you all have in front of you. And a key part of this outcome document was action and taking concrete steps towards actual change. And so kind of in light and in the spirit of this kind of underlying document, I would challenge each of our speakers to answer the following question. What is one concrete step within or alongside the NPT that could strengthen its legitimacy for current and future generations? And we can start off with Tom.
One quick comment. Review conferences are theater. The reality of the NPT implementation is out there in the real world. So the one step that I'd like to see within or even alongside the NPT is the inclusion of the current and the future generations in preparing and developing the practical work for disarmament verification. If we want a world without nuclear weapons, this would be an essential component in that. I look forward to seeing some of you here today leading the way in leading those foundations. Thank you.
Now let's move to Umi.
So I think that the concrete step that would do the most for the NPT's legitimacy is for all state parties, but especially for nuclear-armed countries, to demonstrate that the grand bargain of the NPT still holds, and so that non-nuclear states' commitment to the treaty is met with genuine movement on disarmament and on safe access to peaceful users. So I know that this is not where the political winds are at right now, but the gap between what the treaty promises and what is currently on the table is itself what's eroding the credibility of the treaty. And unfortunately, no amount of better governance or more inclusive participation is going to fully compensate for that. That being said, I think both of those things still matter. And emerging technologies are making the conditions for disarmament harder to establish, while excluding the people who will live longest with the nuclear risk from shaping the treaty weakens the legitimacy of the NPT. So hopefully our efforts in this Useful Disarmament Forum provide some inspiration for the deliberations in the next few weeks and beyond. That's it.
Thank you so much. And now to move to Wilfred.
Thanks. I'll stick with the basics. The importance for states parties to reaffirm their commitment to the treaty, to undertake concrete actions towards implementation of their obligations, in particular on disarmament, to take a forward-looking approach to developments, including across technologies that can impact on the treaty and its pillars. And all of this just entails more de-siloing of conversations, structured interactions across different processes, and with a greater number of actors, including the next generation. Thanks.
All right, and finally, Tiago.
Thank you. So I think it also goes down on how we think about governance. So the NPT can move from reactive to anticipatory governance, and what that means, we could build alongside the review cycle a standing capacity to gather intelligence on how emerging technologies are reshaping nuclear risk, engaging technical communities, civil societies, and youth systematically, so going back to what was mentioned in the beginning of the event, and not just as an afterthought, and translate that intelligence into policy responses before the next review conference. And this can only work with involving the public and not just building things behind closed doors. So, yeah.
Thank you so much to all of our participants, to Umi, Yorgo, Wilfred, and Tom for your productive comments and your insightful discussion. This intergenerational dialogue is really core of what's needed here to really meaningfully bring the voices of different generations into this conversation. So I'd now like to pass the mic over to my fellow moderator, Joel Christoph, another alumni of the Youth for Disarmament Forum. Joel is an economist working on frontier AI governance, a technology and human rights fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Carl Ryan Center, and a member of the International Student Young Pugwash leadership team. So over to you, Joel.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for the very rich exchange. We now turn to reflections on the intergenerational dialogue from 2 member states and 1 civil society representative. Each speaker will have 3 minutes, and an ODA colleague will signal when there's 1 minute remaining. And we'll then close with reflections from the Republic of Korea. So I first invite Ms. Anna Huovila, head of the Unit for Peace and Security at the Permanent Mission of Finland to the United Nations. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for the co-organizers for this very important event, and thank you for the invitation to give these commentary remarks. It's a great honor to be part of this discussion. The shared futuristic scenarios and your discussion today has really demonstrated why meaningful youth participation is so important for the future of the NPT. On top of these traditional aims, as we have heard today, implementation of the NPT must reflect both the emerging security risks and the opportunities posed by new technologies. We must remember that the NPT remains relevant and meaningful to the young people who will carry it forward. Meaningful youth participation entails that young people are not only invited to observe, but to have real opportunities to shape the multi-stakeholder discussions and participate in the decision-making. And I thank you for all the good examples that we have heard during the intergeneration dialogue on this. This is also directly reflected in the first recommendation of the Youth for Disarmament Forum outcome document launched last year at an event co-hosted by Finland and the Republic of Korea. The recommendations encourage member states to institutionalize and resource meaningful youth participation through concrete channels such as youth delegate slots, youth advisory boards, and speaking opportunities. Finland supports these recommendations in practice by advancing the youth peace and security agenda and by creating meaningful opportunities for young people to participate. Let me give you a couple of examples. Finland's national action plans on YPS have been co-developed and put into practice together with young people and civil society. Our recently published second YPS National Action Plan also continues to emphasize meaningful youth participation, partnership, prevention, and youth-inclusive peace and security work, while also making strong reference to disarmament. As expressed today by multiple experts in this discussion, meaningful youth participation is especially important in the NPT context. When we include young people in all their diversity as part of these conversations, the treaty should feel less distant from the realities of communities it is meant to serve. And hopefully also we keep the interest for the also after 10 years to come. Finland has an important and direct role in current NPT review cycle. We are chairing the main committee 3 in the ongoing review conference. And this reinforces the importance we place in keeping treaty credible, inclusive, and future-oriented. To conclude, I'd like to leave you with final practical point. Member states should create more structured entry points for young people in disarmament spaces
such as youth expert briefings, intergenerational dialogue like this, mentorships, funded participation, disarmament educations, and opportunities to engage directly with member states and technical experts. Meaningful youth participation is not an add-on to the NPT, but an essential to keep the treaty relevant, legitimate, and trusted across generations. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hovila. I now turn to Mr. Braulio Fausto, disarmament expert at the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Joel. And thank you also to all the other panelists for their very insightful contributions. Allow me to also thank UNODA and the Republic of Korea, along with the Youth for Disarmament Initiative, for continuing to bring together such an important group of young experts to engage on these critical issues. What we have heard today makes clear that future-proofing the NPT is not only a technical challenge, but it's also an intergenerational responsibility. The legitimacy and long-term sustainability of the treaty will depend on the ability of states parties and the international community as a whole to respond to evolving risks while ensuring that new generations have a meaningful role in shaping its future. Building on today's discussions, allow me to offer some reflections on the impact of emerging technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, on the international security and the NPT regime. There's no doubt that emerging technologies are here to stay. They are already shaping many aspects of our daily life, often making them more efficient. However, these same technologies are also rapidly reshaping the security landscape and introducing new and complex risks to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Mexico is deeply concerned by the potential integration of AI into nuclear command, control, and communication systems. Such developments, as we just heard, could reduce human oversight, compress decision-making timelines, and heighten the risk of accidental, unintended, or even unauthorized use of nuclear weapons. I think one clear takeaway from today's discussions is that technology may accelerate risk, but it does not replace responsibility. No autonomous system, algorithm, or emerging technology should ever replace human responsibility in decisions that could determine the fate of humanity. That is why we presented last year Resolution 80/23 that talks precisely about this. Looking ahead, it is important that NPT states parties begin to converge on clear understandings that pending the total elimination of nuclear weapons states should avoid integrating emerging technologies, including AI, into NC3. We must also be honest, if government frameworks do not keep pace, technological advance risks deepening instability rather than enhancing security. The insights and perspectives shared today should be translated into preventive norms, safeguards, and government frameworks that ensure these technologies strengthen international peace and security rather than increase existential risk. The NPT remains a cornerstone of the global nuclear non-proliferation regime, and we cannot afford for discussions of the risks posed by emerging technologies in this context to remain outside of the treaty. That is why we hope that governments will be able to find meaningful ways also to integrate youth voices. And as I was going through the outcome document, we agreed that it's important to include the youth into the official delegations of the countries and also into NPT discussions. Lastly, allow me just to reaffirm Mexico's commitment to a preventive, ethical, and multilateral approach that places humanity at the center of the technological governments and advance our shared objective of a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fausto. We now hear from Dr. Lyndon Burford, Policy Fellow at BASIC, where he leads the Nuclear Transparency Inventory. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and allow me also to say it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with such an eminent panel, and it's been a fascinating and inspiring discussion. So I'd like to very briefly weave together several of the themes that have come out of this discussion around economics, accountability, and political will. We've heard the proposals for a standing forum of some kind to address emerging and disruptive technologies and their impact on the NPT. I think that's a fantastic idea. The question then becomes, how do you pay for a standing body of that nature? And of course, that's the deeply political question. This leads me to ask, what are the responsibilities of the companies that are making the technology that are leading to these increased risks? And I think that as we move into a world where it's not just multipolar but multi-stakeholder, what are the responsibilities of those companies to fund the type of risk reduction work that is necessary in order to ensure that their technologies are not increasing the likelihood, for example, of catastrophic nuclear weapons use? So I think it's worth bearing that in mind as we think through the question of what sort of structural changes do we need, because ultimately, if it is true, as I believe it is, that these issues are political, then money is a critical political question, and the question of how we're going to fund these types of things. In terms of the question of the technology itself, I would highlight that there seems to be a gap in the conversation about how we ensure the integrity of data. I'm sure that is a part of the conversation, but I would just say that I feel like there's more of a conversation to be had around the role of distributed ledger technologies in ensuring data integrity and ensuring cryptographic verification of the data, whether that data is in artificial intelligence systems, in command and control systems, and any of these types of systems. And that's something that could usefully be taken up in that type of body. But to wrap, I would just come back to, as I said earlier, I think that when we think about accountability, a lot of the risks that we're talking about in terms of new risk in the nuclear field are coming out of corporate advances or advances from the private sector. So I'd emphasize not just that we need those people in the conversation, but we need to ask ourselves, what is the responsibility of those corporations to help fund the type of risk reduction work that we need? And I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you very much. I would now like to invite our participants to share any further brief reflections or questions to our distinguished speakers. If there are any on the floor. Yes.
I want to say thank you all very much for this wonderful panel. I'm Brandon Cortino at the Institute for Security and Technology, and something that I actually wanted to briefly mention, this touches on both Jorgo as well as Wilfred's comments earlier. I think that there's a particular risk with respect to AI misalignment with any kind of involvement with AI integration into NC3 systems that I didn't really hear discussed that much today, but I would love to simply highlight it because I consider it a considerable issue. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or reflections that any members would like to share at this point? Yes.
Thank you very much. Valeria Hesse, Open Nuclear Network. It is the first time probably that I actually heard from a state representative that use should be indeed included onto delegations, and I totally commend this approach because, in fact, perhaps it could even give some new wave of thinking, new wave of coordinating, cooperating, and in general, just a brilliant idea to keep things moving forward when people move on to different posts and different assignments elsewhere. My question is, perhaps you could share a little bit more on, from the practical standpoint, has this been discussed at all, like with the wider audience of colleagues, even perhaps maybe in private, and like what are the stances? What is the kind of approach to it?
and how does it look in practice, basically? Thank you so much.
Thank you. May I now return to our three speakers to invite you to respond?
If I may, yeah. Now, let me just start by thanking for all the questions and comments that were raised. Regarding the participation of young people in official delegations, I can proudly share that Mexico has been, throughout the years, advocating to include young voices in our official missions or in our official delegations when we have to attend meetings. We are one of the few countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that we have a youth delegate program. That program is an institutionalized initiative that brings young people every year to the high-level week and also to the stage where the main committees work. Like, for instance, last year we were able to also have one young youth delegate to be part of the official delegation for the first committee, and that has been an initiative that proudly I could share has been going on for at least 10 years. So it's something that, of course, needs to be discussed within the ministry, but also those that we have, like a youth institute, how we can collaborate. So far, we have seen the advantages of including the young perspective in the official delegations, not only because we continue to spread the seed of why it's important to invest in multilateralism, but also to bring their perspective as youth and as citizens to the discussion that we have here at the UN. It's a program that I believe UNODA knows pretty well, and I'm sure that they could also be able to share more information with those states that consider they could also use the same format that we have to bring the young people at the UN. Thank you.
Thank you to all three speakers. What I have heard across the interventions today ranges quite widely. On the one hand, we've spoken about the importance and the practicalities of youth participation, also about the reasons and the context for what we are seeing in the dynamics relating to nuclear weapons. For instance, the changing security environment as it is perceived, and how the discourse around nuclear weapons has also been changing. And I believe that fundamentally, in the title of today's event, when we speak about future-proofing the NPT, we presuppose that the NPT is the right thing to future-proof, and that future-proof is the right word. And this is where I believe that it's particularly important for us to also ensure that as we invite younger generations in, we don't forget the successes and also the difficulties, but also that we consider the areas where perhaps the NPT or a similar architecture could be made even more future-proof as it is now, whilst also creating the capabilities to respond to new emerging technologies that we have not seen yet. In the past 2 decades, as the transformer architecture that underlies a lot of deep learning took off, there were a lot of surprises, including to some of the private sector companies that have been working and investing in the most advanced models. And in a similar way, when we speak about future-proofing, it is also about the new kinds of technologies, cooperation, and, for instance, the participation and the funding gaps that we'll have to address. And perhaps none of us alone will be able to do it, but I hope that the kinds of conversations we're having now are the right starting point to acknowledge the uncertainties and the difficulties we have, the things we do not know, and also the importance of thinking about a lot of what we see as imperfect compromises and means to an end, where we must not lose sight of the original purpose, whether it be of the NPT or more broadly, the kinds of successes that we would have liked for ourselves, for previous generations, and the ones yet to come. I would like to also thank my fellow moderators and the organizers. And before closing, I now invite the Republic of Korea to share closing reflections. You have the floor.
Well, dear participants, I would like to begin by once again expressing my sincere appreciation to the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs for organizing this event and to everyone who contributed to success. Throughout today's discussion, we have explored one future-oriented scenario highlighting interconnected elements of nuclear weapons and emerging technologies that could weaken the legitimacy of future NPT review conferences. I have to say I'm impressed by the depths of your analysis and insightful comments. And I have to say, I was thinking for a moment, why really do we need young leaders to engage in not just future, in current NPT review process, review conference? I mean, you know, just like everything else, when you start something, you have like a great energy and you have a momentum, but like as time goes by, it's no one's fault. It just happens that way. You tend to lose momentum, and you need fresh energy, and then like a input of new momentum and passion. I think maybe we don't need to wait for future. Maybe we need the fresh input from youth right now. So I really came to think about if there is any way to improve at a personal level to compose our compose our delegation when you participate in the negotiation, or maybe there is internal. I mean, there are ways to improve the internal review process when you prepare for the participation of the review process. So I think this kind of intergenerational discourse made me even like who's been in business for more than 20 years to think about the sort of utility of this kind of discourse. So in this sense, I think it was meaningful to not only to youth participants, but also to already experts and this national level delegation as well. So I have to say the dialogue today is more than just event that produces an outcome document. It's about people, the ideas, and actually our sense of responsibility for our future generation. So with the young leaders from 14 different countries, the network you have built here is itself one of the most valuable achievements. I sincerely encourage you to stay connected, to keep questioning, and to keep bringing bridges across borders and generations beyond these rooms. Once again, I thank all of you for your commitment and inspiration. The Republic of Korea remains firmly committed to engaging, empowering, and educating youth in the field of disarmament and non-proliferation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beck. As we come to a close, I recall the last Youth for Disarmament Forum, where many of us youth met in person for the first time, but we continued to work onwards from different time zones and continents. And it makes me think of today's event as well, in that whether this is the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning is largely a question that is asked of us. And similarly, as one of our speakers said, some things are theater. The real work happens in the real world. So I hope that we will consider quite seriously perhaps the idea that we simply must continue. And it also reminds me of the idea that as we struggle towards a world that we would like for ourselves and all of us, perhaps in retrospect, the years of struggle will one day strike us as the most beautiful. So before you go, I would like to draw your attention to 3 things to take with you. First, the Youth for Disarmament Forum outcome document. Printed copies are available, and the QR code is on the screen. Second, we also have the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists op-ed by 2 forum alumni that are present, that elaborate on many of the themes discussed today, and where you can learn more about the work undertaken by our members. And third, a summary document from this event will be developed and circulated to all participants in the coming weeks. Thank you to UNODA, the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea, our speakers, and all of you for being part of this conversation. Thank you very much.